Now, some Christians or people who might not have ever believed in relativism might think it's silly how anyone could believe that truth is subjective. But I used to believe this. Hello, I'm Melissa Dougherty here for CrossExamined.org. Relativism. It's the belief that the way we view truth and reality depends on the societal, moral, cultural, and sometimes political norms of the day. In other words, truth is not absolute. It is subjective, and it changes depending on each individual's view. In today's pop lingo, it's similar to people just living their truth. But really, it's unlivable and inconsistent. Relativism is like playing Monopoly with a 7-year-old. They make up the rules as they go and can't even consistently live by their own standards. If it's true that people can live by their own truth, which is the standard of right and wrong, then that means that we make the judgment call and don't have to answer to a higher authority. Beyond that, it seems people haven't really thought out how unlivable this ideology really is. Who can live in a world where yes is the same as no? It is evident that relativism has infected our society. We see this everywhere. When we abandon the idea that any sort of higher law of truth applies to each individual person, at the end of the day, all that remains is a subjective personal opinion based on feelings and what brings us the most pleasure. But this brings about a very troubling thought. Who decides what is true and false? If pleasure is our litmus test for our individual truth, then whose standard of pleasure should we follow? When it's lived out and led to its logical conclusion, what naturally follows from the consequence of relativism being true is that if there is no such thing as objective truth, then that means what's left is only power. The ones in power are the ones who decide what's true or not. The value of truth claims depends on who's making them in this case. This means that there are no objective moral laws that are binding on all persons everywhere. Also, another fun fact. Another problem led to its logical conclusion is that if there is no truth, then that means that lies don't exist. So for the person claiming there is no truth, they don't typically think that far ahead of their own claim. The irony is that lies actually prove that truth exists. Something evil or bad can only make sense against the backdrop of good. You can have truth without lies, but it is impossible to have lies without truth. Now, some Christians or people who might not have ever believed in relativism might think it's silly how anyone could believe that truth is subjective. But I used to believe this. I not only believed it, I found it almost irresistible to believe. This is not just appealing for some people, but relieving. There are many reasons why I used to find relativism appealing, but let me explain some of that reasoning with an illustration. Picture it. You're a college student. You love learning, reading, and hearing new ideas. This is a good thing. We should all love these things despite our beliefs. You're in a world religions class. The professor goes through each religion and describes what each believes and the differences between them. The professor accurately describes each one, being very careful and mindful to be accurate in their description. You discover, however, that each one of these beliefs obviously contradict one another. You find yourself becoming very overwhelmed with the thought of trying to sift through each one to discover which one might be true. And not only that, the professor next shows an image of the universe and an impossible number of galaxies out there. You find that you cannot possibly comprehend the intensity of what you're seeing. You feel extremely small. And with everything out there to possibly know and comparing it to what we don't know, how can anyone then claim to know truth? You actually find yourself becoming extremely uncomfortable with the thought of absolute truth. You get so overwhelmed that you inevitably default to relativism to relieve that dissonance. You immediately feel better. You feel relief. You feel okay with this. You feel that nobody could possibly know the answers to these things, so you suspend judgment, of knowing the truth. Embracing this relief, you can now continue hearing everyone else's ideas and beliefs, even if they contradict. It would seem that it's silly to claim to know truth with the majesty of the universe and the complexity of spirituality. Now, this illustration is just one of many to show why so many people are actually uncomfortable with the thought of absolute truth. If there's absolute truth, that means there's a line in the sand. There's a very powerful social incentive to default to relativism. People are more liked, they're popular, and depicted as more open-minded and tolerant. And sadly, many Christians have fallen prey to this as well. Jesus believed in and taught absolute truth. Before he was crucified, he said before Pilate in John 18:37, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world. I bear witness to the truth. Everyone who loves the truth listens to my voice." In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the famous love chapter, it very clearly says in verse 6 that real love rejoices in truth. If you're interested in learning more about this topic and my ministry, you can visit my YouTube channel or website listed in the description. And for more exclusive content from myself and other wonderful apologists, make sure to subscribe to CrossExamined.org below.